Hello, everybody. Welcome on in. Pull up a digital seat, make yourselves comfortable. We're excited to have you all here today. We've got an awesome session planned for you all with some just illustrious guests, incredibly knowledgeable. They're all excited to be here. I'm seeing smiles across the board. So we know that you guys are in good hands. We're going to share some wonderful insight into things for you all today. Again, a big ol' thank you for being here. To kind of get you guys all settled in a little bit, I'd love to hear where in the world you're tuning in from. It is always astounding for me. I'm a community manager. I'll tell you a little bit more about that later, but it's always fantastic for me to see just the absolute global reach of communities such as our Unity one here. So already seeing people from Utah and Istanbul, Austin, Texas, Mumbai, Central Texas, Copenhagen. Thank you guys. Fill up that chat. We'd love to see it. While you do that, there is a bit of a survey that has just been pushed to you all in this Zoom webinar. A couple of questions for you here to just kind of get a little bit more familiar with who we're talking to. The goal is to make our content as effective as possible for our audience. So this will help us do that for future webinars, future pieces of content, letting us know your guys' experience and how you plan to utilize this information. So go ahead, if you have a moment, to handle that poll. Thank you to Madison for putting that in there for everybody to see. Again, thank you, everybody. A couple of reminders, a couple of housekeeping items before we really dive into things today. A reminder that this session will be recorded. So if you happen to join late, you'll miss this message. So it doesn't really make sense for you right now, but this will be recorded and then sent to everybody in the next day or two. So you should be able to have all of that even if you have to leave early. I guess that one's more applicable to the people who are hearing this exact message. But again, you will have access to this at a later time as well. Throughout this presentation, you have an opportunity to ask questions. We're going to have panelists sharing their experience. We're going to have a little bit of an overview at the top end here as well. But if you have questions, you can use the handy dandy little Q&A section there for you in the Zoom window, and those questions will go straight to our team. Now, we do have someone from the engineering team here who will be answering questions where they can throughout the presentation. Mingwei and Adam, thank you both for managing that. However, towards the end of the session, we will have a Q&A section completely dedicated to addressing some of these questions with our panelists, things that might be more applicable to the broader audience. So make sure to use that Q&A box throughout the session, and we'll try and answer as many questions as we can. How's everyone feeling? Thumbs from our panelists. Everyone feeling good? Ready to go? Excited? There we go. That's what I like to see. All right, everybody. I'm going to show you all a little slideshow here as we dive in to get things ready for you all. All right. Welcome, everybody, to best practices for migrating from the built-in render pipeline to URP. My name's Jackson. I'm a senior community manager here at Unity. I'm responsible for a lot of our Twitch and YouTube live stream content. For full context, I am not a game developer, and that is why we have brought the brightest, the smartest, the most experienced minds here to speak about their experiences directly. That's why we have all of the smartest people in the room here to answer all of your questions. If you would like to check out some of our live stream content, that will always be there for you. It's a fantastic place to bring developers, curious minds, brilliant minds together and talk about all things Unity, game development, and community. All right. We have some fantastic guests here representing Scopely, Kluge Interactive, and of course, Anvil Game Studio. We're going to go around the room here for a quick introduction for each of them. Gang, what I would love to hear from you, I'm going to throw things to you. Please tell us who you are, what you do, and if you don't mind, for a little color, what is your favorite game? We're going to get things started with Scopely here. We're going to go to Chris and then Emily. Welcome on in, you two. Thank you for being here.
Hello, I'm Chris Aguirre. I'm the lead technical artist on Marvel Strike Force with Scopely and Boundless. Favorite games, probably still Final Fantasy X, though Baldur's Gate 3 has been eating up a lot of my time.
Great picks. Thank you, Chris. Emily, welcome.
Hi, I'm Emily. I'm the senior graphics engineer on Marvel Strike Force with Scopely and Boundless. My favorite game is probably Stardew Valley.
Ooh. And with a big update in the last few months, you must be living large. Emily, thank you. I love your background as well. We're going to throw things over to Klug here, Esteban and Justin. Welcome. How are you guys?
Doing all
Hello,
right.
everyone.
All right, let's get things started with you, Esteban. Where are you? Who are you? What do you do? And what do you love?
Thank you, Jackson. I'm Esteban Meneses from Colombia, and I'm the lead 3 artist in Kluge Interactive on the game Scene Riders. That's like our flagship VR game. Uh, and I'm glad to be here again. Oh, and my favorite game of all times, it's Battlefield 3 because most of the matches just pulled straight from like a movie.
I love it. I love it. Thank you, Esteban.
Thanks to you.
Julian. Oh, sorry.
Hello,
I
also.
skipped. Justin.
Oh, yeah. You did.
Let's go to Justin and then we'll swing over to you, Julian. I apologize.
All right. Sorry, Julian. I'm getting in your way here. I'm Justin Dopiriak. I'm the lead developer on Synth Riders at Kluge Interactive. And I'm up in New York. And for favorite games, all time, it's tough to say. Final Fantasy VII holds a special place in my heart always. More, if we go by time, maybe World of Warcraft, but maybe let's not go by time. Let's stick with Final Fantasy VII.
Yeah, that's a scary concept looking at your time played in any MMORPG. So thank you guys for sharing, of course, Klug, creators of Synth Riders. We're going to swing things over to Anvil Game Studios now, creators of Holdfast Nations at War. Julian, I'm sorry, I had a false start with you there. I didn't mean to get you started, only to pump your brakes immediately. Julian, get us started. Where are you from? What do you work on? And what's your favorite game?
That's okay, no problem. We can easily start again. So, hello everybody. I'm Julian Farrugia, and I am from the small island of Malta. Probably a lot of you don't know where it is, but just Google it and you'll see. I am the art director and the co-founder of Anvil Game Studios, and my favorite game, it's a tough one, but I would probably say it's Mountain Blade Warband, simply because one, I've put a lot of hours into playing it, and two, it's the game that got me into game development through its modding community. So, yeah, um, definitely that one.
I think that's awesome. I'm always curious to know as well, like what games inspire people? How did you end up wanting to make games? What was that game for you? So thank you for sharing, Julian. Wallentin, we're going to swing things over to you to wrap things up. Tell us all about yourself.
Yeah, I'm Valentin. I'm also presently in Malta. I'm the producer and lead developer at Anvil Game Studios, presently working on Holdfast Nations at War. And for me, my favorite game of all time is still and will forever remain GTA San Andreas, because I lived in a household that didn't have internet for a long time. So I played like GTA San Andreas 8 times, and I essentially explored every corner of it. And I ended up doing so many like small discoveries myself, and it also kind of like led me to game development. And then honorable mention, obviously, PG3 as well. I'm on my fourth playthrough, so
Wow.
there you
Baldur's
go.
Gate 3 took the world by storm, didn't it?
Yeah, pretty
I
much.
appreciate
Yeah.
it. Thank you for sharing, everybody. Thank you again. Welcome to our teams from Scopely, representing Marvel Strike Force, Klug, of course, Synth Riders, and Anvil Game Studios. Hold fast, nations at war. I'm excited. I hope you guys are as well. Thank you one more time for joining us. As we dive into our show here, what are we talking about? We've got a few things on screen for you here, but we brought in an expert, someone to speak more authoritatively to it. I want to welcome and introduce you all to Nancy LaRue. Nancy, how are you? Thank you for joining us.
I'm good, thank you. You didn't ask me what my favorite game was.
Nancy, what's your favorite game?
I don't do favorites. That's the thing. It's really hard. I don't do favorites. It's just, it's a thing.
It is It is a difficult question. It's a thing where we all play games, so it feels like a natural question, but every time I ask it, people are like, this is the hardest question I've ever had to answer in my life. But I do love that you put me on blast for not asking you, but then when I did, you refused to answer the question.
I was kind of glad you didn't, so.
That's a power move.
Oh no, I'm just bugging you.
That's great.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, I'm Nancy. So I'm on the product marketing team for the engine, and I get to focus on the fabulous world of graphics and rendering. So we're really excited to get everybody here today, especially all the folks, the panelists from the different studios, different size of studios that are going to show you the breadth of URP's performance, the platform reach, and also the experience that they've had with the migration. Just to let you know, like in the past few years, the product team has invested a lot into URP. The goal was to provide more flexibility, better customization, and obviously like better performance across all the platforms that we support, right? Which is quite a lot. So what's been happening in the last year or so, a couple years, is that we're seeing more and more people starting to move over to URP. So we wanted to kind of like start that conversation with everybody, and you know, help get influence outside of us, and you know, and share experiences. And I think one of the reasons too is that there are some limitations with the built-in render pipeline in terms of platforms. So URP has really helped with solving some of those limitations. And just, I'm sure everybody already knows, but URP is the universal render pipeline. So it's our rendering pipeline that supports low-end mobile, PC console, web, all the way through to VR. So it's, you know, it's got a lot of multi-platform capabilities. So the one thing I did want to mention is if anybody, I'm sure you all know that Unity 6 is releasing later this year. And one of the changes that we've decided to make is that now URP is going to be default in the hub, following with HDRP. And the reason for that is just because of its advancements in the performance and optimization, but also all the new features, like the really cool like performance boosts, and all the visual and the lighting enhancements coming with Unity 6 will be available with URP and HDRP. So we really want folks to start getting started with new projects in the hub with URP or HDRP if you're looking for high fidelity. And then quickly, the last thing I wanted to mention is that we're here to support you on this journey. There's been a lot of questions about the migration. You know, will I get the performance I need? And so throughout the, you know, the webinar today, we'll be sharing some guides that are going to help you through the process, but also through our discussions community platform. If you're looking to make the change, you want to learn more about it, please reach out to discussions and tag in URP, built into URP, and we're definitely going to help you through the process. So I think that's about it. And there will be more of these webinars and sessions through our Unite event. A lot more about this topic will be coming out as folks have questions, and we want to help you through it. I think that's it, Jackson.
Nailed it, Nancy. You did such a great job. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Of course. All right, gang, before we really dive into the meat and potatoes here today, a couple more things. First, I have to issue an apology to Kluge Studio for saying your studio name wrong multiple times. So Justin, Esteban, I hope that you can forgive me. Kluge, everybody. And a reminder that we have Adam working behind the scenes here, who will be dropping different URP resources in the chat. So keep an eye out there. And one more reminder to fill up your questions in the Q&A. We'll get some answered throughout, and then we'll have a dedicated section at the end of this roundtable. But for now, we can dive right in. So we're going to start with a general question to the group. We can go studio by studio. You guys can share your answers that route so that we're not all talking over each other. But our question that we're going to get started with is, what were the opportunities that led you to migrate your built-in projects to URP? And how did you evaluate before committing? Because you're closest on my screen, let's throw things to Anvil Studios. You guys want to share a bit of your experience?
Yeah, of course. I'm happy to share our experience. So for us, it was all essentially about the long-term maintainability of the game. Holdfast has been adding content for 7 years. It's entered early access in 2017. We started kind of getting issues with RAM usage and install size because we were stuck with like old established Unity 4 workflows. So for anyone who remembers that still, I just gonna drop like 2 examples. Like because of those workflows, pushing even a small change to a level or adding a new level to the game would essentially cause a 500 MB update to players. The second example was that when we're kind of running out of texture space in our atlases, so we slowly are increasing our RAM usage. So we were kind of forced, if we want to continue supporting Holdfast, to essentially come up with a solution. So how did we evaluate before we committed to the migration? Before we decided to migrate to URP, we first migrated a small vertical slice of 2 levels, and one of them is a land-based level, the other one was a naval-based level because they have 2 distinct sets of shaders. Then we just simply profiled built-in versus URP version in exactly the same spot and did the comparison between them. And when we compared the 2 game versions, we thought something went wrong. This is how much of a difference it was. So that we instantly knew, like, because the results were so clear, that we essentially then straight up decided to migrate.
I like that. A night and day difference.
Yes, it is.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. Let's swing things over to Scopely. Scopely, you want to share a little bit about your experience?
Yeah. So our old content pipeline was initially designed to scale down to devices as low as the iPhone 4S, which we no longer support. I think we even deprecated support before we launched the game back in 2018. And it was meant to scale up to higher end devices through deferred rendering, which just didn't emerge as a great fit for our game. We didn't support it. And the way that our system was built, it also prevented us from using new tools from Unity, such as, you know, some of the profilers, things like that. They just weren't as effective. And so we decided that if we're going to continue creating content, if we want to create new effects, new things for players, we needed to ultimately switch over because we were just so limited with our previous content pipeline. So we did a similar thing where we converted a handful of characters, got, you know, some different varieties, some of our troublesome characters, things where in our old system we weren't quite happy with, you know, how they came out. And we saw just a great visual upgrade using URP, and we were able to get a lot of, you know, lighting and upgrade and awesome visual effects by transitioning. And so once we were happy with those results, then we started building some custom conversion tools since we didn't use the built-in ones, didn't work for us. So we started doing that and doing the conversion, and now the game looks really cool.
Great. We like to hear that. Absolutely. Thank you. And Kluge Studios, tell us all about your experience.
Well, basically we start like seeing that all the platforms that the game was on, what leading toward URP, like PlayStation VR2, and most recently the Apple Vision Pro. So that step was like a must for us. And as an artist, we always try to look new ways to deploy that visual candy that everyone wants. So shader graph and visual effects graph was 2 of the tools that we scoped for a while, and the power to like craft shaders to bring that to all our artists, even the less technical ones, myself included. Like that was key for the development of experience in our game. And for the mixed reality part that you can see on the game, that was crafted with visual effect graph, and it's like a wall made of thousands or even millions or meshes, and doing that on the CPU on a mobile device on VR, you know, 120 FPS is extremely hard. So that URP helped us leverage that and achieve that goal for us.
Awesome. Thank you again, everybody, for sharing a little bit. We're going to swing into a little bit more direct questions, a little bit more project specific. Again, audience, if you're hanging out, if you have any questions, use that Q&A box. We'll try and get them answered throughout the show or asked towards the end. Again, you've got a lot of knowledge and experience in this room, so make sure to get those questions in here. But I want to turn our attention over to Scopely here. Chris and Emily, please let me know here. What are your performance benchmarks for Marvel Strike Force, Marvel's #1 mobile game in my heart, anyways? And how did URP help you hit those benchmarks?
Yeah, so our primary benchmarks are FPS and memory usage. So we utilize our quality assurance team as well as Unity's profiling tools to analyze performance across a wide range of devices, since we go from low-end mobile to high-end tablets and support all of those devices. We wanted to ensure that we were providing players with, great experience once we do the update. We also referenced Unity's optimization documentation for URP and combined that guidance with the project requirements to ensure that we use mobile-friendly effects and turned off anything that we weren't using. We also utilized scriptable render passes to efficiently implement custom effects that we had in our old pipeline. We found that render features worked best for effects that were active all the time. Many of our effects are only active in certain environments, such as combat. So we found that injecting the passes via scripting worked really well and allowed us to more efficiently manage the extra resources that the effects use, such as, materials or render textures. And then the camera system is a little bit different in URP. And our project setup uses additively loaded scenes a lot. So by default, the camera stacking system doesn't support adding the cameras from additively loaded scenes into the stack. So we wrote a custom camera manager for that. And through that conversion, we also identified any cases of overdraw and were able to reduce those.
Excellent. Chris nodding along. If you feel like you want to add anything, you can, but I'm not going to put that pressure on.
No, Emily pretty much got the whole gist of it. Another benchmark we used was, of course, our old rendering engine and making sure we still maintain some form of parity and comparison with that as well, and improvements, of course.
Great. Thank you for the added context. Anything else, Chris or Emily, before we swing into our next question here?
I think that's all for me.
Great. I appreciate it. Valentin and Julian, swinging our attention over your direction here from Anvil Game Studios, of course. Holdfast Nations at War features large-scale battles. I feel like I'm reading an ad. It's great. In detailed environments, how is URP helping you manage the complex rendering needs of this project? What improvements have you seen versus built-in? And were there any surprise benefits?
Yeah, I don't think we need to get into game marketing here. We're just here to talk about the development,
Great.
But Holdfast has a great development story. Of course, our game is by nature, it's a very CPU heavy game because we support over 150 players on a single server. And what makes it even harder is that all these players are always being rendered on the screen, right? So knowing this, like, we needed to find new ways on how to really go in and optimize the CPU, because the GPU side of Holdfast, it was always performing adequately even on lower end devices, but the CPU side, it was quite bad. So just as a history, Holdfast is like a game that started development in Unity 4 a very long time ago. And back then, to go in and really optimize our levels in the built-in pipeline, we relied on a technique called manual mesh combining. Basically because with our testing, like just doing static batching in our levels, it wasn't performant enough. So we had to go with a combination of static batching and manual mesh combining. And to explain, so manual mesh combining is just like a process that's done to reduce draw calls by merging together similar meshes or materials in the scene, right? So this process did a very good job of reducing draw costs, but it greatly increased RAM usage and also install size because manual mesh combining creates these large, unique meshes that you cannot really share within the scene or even between scenes in most of our cases. Now, thankfully, even for example, another technique that we were using previously, the URP update is atlasing. With the SRP batcher now, we don't really care about atlasing our textures anymore. Just for example, we used to texture all our characters into one huge 8K texture, which would fit about 14 characters. And while this might seem like a lot, in all these years, we quickly hit the limit, right? That was basically we're going to end up where in a situation where we're going to be using a lot of VRAM, or we would just choose to even stop releasing new characters for our game. So obviously, since Holdfast, we plan on supporting it for the long term, we decided to find a way on how to fix this issue as well. And that's where the SRP batcher came in, because with the SRP batcher, we only care about using the same shader variant. So we skip all the atlasing, we skip all the textures, and now we just do texture meshing separately. This means, for example, that we don't have to load them anymore, and we just worry about releasing content, and that's it. Also, just to touch apart, a surprising part of all of this, apart from the great performance benefits that we got, is it also massively reduced our production time. Since now we can skip this manual mesh combining process and also the atlasing, right? So in the end, from our benchmarks, that's why Valentin before mentioned that it was sort of unbelievable for us, but we managed to halve the install size of our game. We managed to even halve the RAM usage of our game, and with the CPU side, we managed to reduce the renderer thread by about 30%. So that was our experience with migrating to URP, basically.
Those are big numbers. Those are big numbers.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Wellington,
Yeah,
anything
big.
to add there? Again, you don't have to.
Well, just the fact that essentially now we also have the capability of keep releasing updates and keep supporting the game.
Yeah, fantastic. I appreciate it. Thank you both. Swinging things over to Justin and Esteban here. How did you customize URP to maintain the high performance and low latency that's so crucial for VR experiences?
Well, try to add something to the conversation. This is specific for standalone headsets. And in our case, the performance in PC was pretty great, pretty straightforward, because the visuals on our game are pretty simple. But on this headset, the store buffers was one of the most taxing processes. These headsets are tile-based rendering systems, so it takes a long time to gather all the tiles and copy them to memory because the bandwidth is very tiny. So discarding buffers was key. We just come to this basically by trial and error. And also the intermediate textures, the bleed, it's pretty useful, the bleed, because when you want to apply full screen effects and things like that. But in our case was also very taxing. So in the forward render asset, you can turn that into automatic, and in the main URP asset, you can show the additional properties and set to discard buffers. So that helps a lot. That leaves us without access to the depth buffer to do nice stuff like subparticles and things like volumetric fog or things like that. So if you really need that, there's an option where you can use the depth priming, like a pre-pass. So it generates every time instead of copying that to the screen from the screen. That can help some milliseconds and also give you the access to the buffer again. And in our case was a huge gain in performance because our game is pretty linear. So we have a lot of opaque overdraw. So that was a huge time saving for us.
Awesome. Thank you, Esteban.
Yeah.
Justin.
I just want to reiterate the store buffers thing. Like if you are making something for I guess any tile-based architecture, but specifically if you're making something for the Quest and you're going to URP, you're going to want to look at your frame debugger and check for something called final blit. And if you see final blit, that's your enemy. You need to get rid of that. Very handy for sure on something like PC where you can have post-processing or any full screen effects. But yeah, on the tile-based architecture, you see that for any reason, and it's basically going to cut your frame rate in half. There are a lot of different things that will make that pop up. So yeah, that if there's like one thing that anybody takes away from anything I say during this roundtable, it's if you are working with the Quest, you want to get rid of those store buffers, which is on the the render asset, the render pipeline asset. But up until at least Unity 6, I think this changed for 6. But you have to enable the show additional options or show additional features. One of those. There's like the 3 dots up in the inspector when you have your render pipeline asset selected, and you have to tell it to show those, and then that option will pop up to let you discard the buffers, and you really want to do that. So that's the one thing I want to make sure that anybody who starts working with the Quest knows, because that took us some time to figure out. And there are other things that will kind of force it on. So you'll have to do like a bit of research, I think, to make sure you actually know like all the things you can and can't do with tile-based architecture without kind of giving up the benefits of that architecture. Like Bloom, for example, was kind of a big one for us. It's like a big part of the visuals on PC. Can't do that on the Quest without making that big sacrifice. So yeah, just make sure you're not completely throwing away the benefits of using that architecture. If you're on the Quest, you got to get in and make sure that you get rid of that plit.
Justin, that's great. It sounds like it was a harrowing experience, and it sounds like you're giving this message of like, yeah, I could tell it felt like a personal warning, like, guys, heads up, this is like learn from my mistakes so you don't have to type of moment, which was great. And a number of people already thanking you in the chat here as well. So I think they appreciate it. Before we move on to the next question, purely for my own curiosity, Justin and or Esteban, what planet are you guys on with your backgrounds there?
I think we have I think it's just called the planet.
That works.
As a matter of fact, the stage that it comes from.
No, that's great.
That's
I
very
think,
helpful. That's the name that it got. I don't know.
I mean, honestly, that is a correct answer if you ask anyone where they are. If they say the planet, accurate, but I appreciate it. Thank you. We're going to turn our attention back to Scopely here, Emily and Chris, and/or Chris. How did URP's real-time lighting and post-processing capabilities help you enhance Marvel Strike Force's visual appeal? I know we talked a little bit about the visuals already, but how did it change your thinking about the kinds of experiences you could deliver to players?
Yeah, so our previous system was rather limited in how much we could customize. It was very scene-based. So for a lot of our menu scenes that kind of lived in the same Unity scene, we weren't able to customize too much between menus or things like that, or really update lighting and things like that. So switching to URP gave our artists just massive benefits in being able to customize lighting and drastically improve their iteration time. So I'll pass it to Chris to elaborate a little more on that.
Oh, yeah, that iteration time, I'll speak a lot on that at the end, but for our old pipeline, we just had to constantly say no to our artists for a lot of the cool ideas that they've had. And that's just because of the limitations of what we launched with. I'm sure a lot of people here can kind of relate to that, but with the switch over to URP, we can now start saying yes, or maybe even maybe to some of these things, where it can actually explore these things with the possibility that they could become reality. Some of the things are like, it's very simple, but it's something we haven't been able to do, but having custom lighting for every one of our Marvel characters, to highlight their best features. Maybe one character in particular looks better in purple light rather than bright white light, making them blow out stuff. We have a lot more fine control over the post-processing than we did before. And we can even switch it up for low-end and high-end devices as well. So that's been a huge plus for us to really cater the experience to the device and making sure we're not dropping quality across the board. And going back to the iteration thing I mentioned before, I'm going to talk a lot of smack about our old engine, but it took a long time to bake stuff and set up lighting. With Unity, I can light up a whole scene under an hour and bake it in like 2 to 3 minutes. And I can even stop a bake midway through if I want to, just move a light without wasting, an entire day just lighting up a single environment, or even longer sometimes. So it's just been a huge benefit for us to move over to that. And it allows us to really change up the experience for the players, because we can give them cooler, newer, better lit stuff, cooler new shaders with a lot more capabilities than we had before. So again, saying no to the artists in the past is now a thing of the past. And thanks to Emily's efforts and, URP as well, we're able to actually start saying yes and maybe and possibly yes to a lot of things that we would just straight up say no to.
Emily, I see you unmuted there. Is there more you want to add? Again, no pressure.
No, I think Chris got everything else in there.
Awesome. I'm seeing in chat here that you guys are also giving a talk at Unite. Are you guys excited for that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Excited to go to Barcelona.
Great. Yeah, absolutely. And before we move on, I need to know, as a pair of people working on a Marvel game, do you have a favorite Marvel character in your own game? Purely anecdotally, that's not in the script.
Well, in the game, my favorite character is Silver Surfer, but that's just because when I first transitioned to focusing in graphics, I did the little Fresnel effect for him. So that one's my favorite character in the game.
Perfect.
My favorite's the one that made me suffer the most, which was Cloak. But right now, the one that's technically impressive from like what we achieved on the tech art side is Symbiote Silver Surfer. It's Silver Surfer, but he was taken over by a symbiote, and he has all these tentacles, and it looks crazy. Go look at him.
Very cool. Very cool. Thank you both. We're going to turn our attention back over here to Anvil Games. So, gang, please let us know. Holdfast Nations at War allows players to create modded levels and character skins using Unity and Steam Workshop. Did migrating to URP affect mods built with BIRP? Has URP made modding your game easier? How do you guys support your mod community?
Oh yeah, that's a very interesting question, a very important one, because modding is a lot of the times overlooked. I obviously come myself from a modding background, so I'm very adamant to make this work right. But yeah, did migrating to URP affect mods built with built-in pipeline? Definitely yes. In fact, it affected the majority of our mods, mainly modded characters and levels, as those include custom materials and shaders. At the core of our mods, just like with a lot of like dynamic data that you load into Unity, are asset bundles. And in this case, our asset bundles were built with our SDK, which is like a separate project we ship to people, and it's in this case a built-in project. And loading these asset bundles into URP will obviously result in a lot of arrow shaders, so lots of pink. It won't work. Migrating the SDK Unity project to URP solved this issue for future mods. However, it also at the same time like it didn't do any good for the existing mods. And obviously we didn't want to break the thousands of workshop mods we had at the time. Like we had like 4,000. A lot of people put a lot of effort into there. Some people paid for those mods. So we don't want to like essentially undo all of that work with the click of a button. So we required a solution for that at runtime, that worked at runtime essentially, because you don't want to end up with pink uniforms or pink characters in this case. So what we ended up doing was we built a runtime migrator for built-in materials that we based on that very the Unity editor tool that you can get in the dropdown, like convert materials to Unity. That tool already kind of contained most of what we needed. It contained shader mappings like migrators for built-in shaders, like standard terrain, the particle shaders. Then you also had some like the legacy ones. So those were covered. We then extended that tool. So we moved it into the game from the editor, extended that tool to also add additional migrators for third-party shaders. And the way we essentially selected which shaders we're going to support was we select like 200 popular mods, loaded them all into the URP, looked which one broke, and then we just made like mappers essentially that automatically at runtime swap these out. And at that point, like the results were actually quite great. The majority of mods were still compatible once our URP update was released. We didn't obviously get every shader, like there were some missing shaders, but some invisible grass there, some pink models there, but it wasn't unplayable. And of course, these people could then just re-export their mod with a URP compatible shader and would just work as intended again. We also realized at that point that these custom migrators would have been very useful to have during our Unity project migration. I'm not sure who mentioned that earlier, that they kind of like built their own migration, URP migration tools. That would have been really nice to have to actually have this tool. But again, like we already, at that point, Julian already migrated all of our custom materials himself. So if anyone needs that code for that tool, it's actually inside of the URP package. It's called, the class name is Universal Render Pipeline Material Upgrader. So you can essentially extend it, add your own variants, and cover your own custom materials, and that will probably save you some time. Then looping back to the second question, did URP make modding easier? And this is also a very clear yes. We managed to cut a lot of our custom shaders from our SDK project because we had a custom decal shader. We had a custom double-sided shader. But now all of these are kind of like covered by URP lit. So we just got rid of that. So that made it a lot easier for modders to essentially get their mods in. We also, surprisingly, saw great performance benefits because mods by themselves were never mesh combined. They weren't following our Unity 4 approach because they're all isolated asset bundles. So they weren't mesh combined, they weren't atlased. So now they actually, because of the SRP batcher, they actually ended up being batched correctly. And players are now able to create modded characters and levels that performance-wise are on par with what we have in our game. And that's absolutely fantastic. So yeah, thanks SRP batcher for that.
That's great. Again, Julian, I want to give you an opportunity to add anything, but if you don't want to, you can just shake your head and that's totally fine too.
That's fine.
Yeah. I appreciate it. Before we move on, Wellington, for me, I know you mentioned that you got into game dev through through the modding community, unless you guys want to continue to support it. That's actually a relatively common thing I've seen in just the last few weeks in conversations with devs. What sort of games were you building mods for early?
Oh yes, I started back in Half-Life 1. I am well, it wasn't a mod, but I started as a level designer. I made some maps for Half-Life 1 zombie mod. Then I went over to Half-Life 2, Day of Defeat Source. Then I did some for Zombie Master. Then I did some for Zombie Panic Source, and then CS::GO. And then I also like made like some mods for Company Furious Eastern Front. So like I went all around, but then I ended up as a game developer. But I'm it's very important for me that the game I develop has proper modding support. So that's why we're sticking with it.
No, it's perfect. It's fantastic. And again, it mirrors another developer that I spoke to that did the same thing. They're like, I started in mods. The game that I'm creating will support mods. I love that that's a way that you guys support the community that you came from. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah. So we essentially like ended up adapting a lot of the principles that the other mod engines did essentially. So that was quite good to have that kind of knowledge to move it over. So if Unity ever wants to do a webinar about mods, mod support, invite me. I'll be there. I'm ready.
All right. I hope the overlords watching in the backgrounds have heard your offer, and then maybe you'll get a message. I see Nancy's excited in the chat. That's fantastic to see. All right, gang, for all of you watching, thank you again for being here. We're not wrapping up. I know that that's how that sounds, but we're going to move into a more general question for the group and get a little bit of conversation flowing here. But a reminder to you all to get those questions in the Q&A function here on Zoom, as we will try to answer as many as we can. We have people actively answering questions, but we do have a dedicated time set aside at the end of this session to make sure that we have an opportunity to discuss them with our group here. So we'll see how that goes. But as we kind of transition here, a general question to the group. What were your major takeaways from the migration process? What would you tell teams who are thinking of moving their projects to URP? In kind of concluding thoughts fashion, let's throw things over to Scopely to get things started here.
All right. It definitely takes a lot of time and effort to do the conversion. So I think it is important to evaluate your project and test and see what URP can give you. We have 3 different studios here that found a lot of benefits through it, so it's probably a good idea. And so yeah, so for us it was very needed in order to keep creating content. And then one of the things that really helped us get through the conversion process, because we had, numerous combat environments, characters, VFX, orbs, all these things that we needed to convert. And our old system used a lot of custom shaders, custom lights, custom render settings, all of that stuff that we needed to convert over. So if you're more using the built-in, then Unity's kind of built-in conversion tool might be really useful. For us, that just didn't suffice, so we built our own conversion tools. So we were able to convert an entire environment at once, convert all the lights, all the shaders, everything, and get that over. And we did a similar thing for characters in VFX. And that really helped because I was able to kind of build the converters and then hand that off to Chris and say, have fun, go convert everything, and do a little bit of polish while I work on building out some of the other things. So I think that really helped us save us a lot of time through the conversion process. And then, yeah, the only other thing I'd say is URP has a little bit of a learning curve. It's a little bit different than built-in. So I think checking out the documentation, learning a lot of the differences towards the beginning will be really beneficial. And then you can kind of see which things might really help your project and what things might be a lot better than built-in or whatever kind of system you're using.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, just to add to that, it's one advice I would give is really do a proper audit of your project. Look at what actually needs to happen to go over to URP. Emily mentioned a lot of converters, and that is true. There was a lot of them, yes, and especially in the live game, that with content constantly coming out. we had to manage not only our existing content pipeline, but the future one as well. So really take an audit of like what is necessary to make that transition, pre-plan, pre-production, etc., and make sure you kind of cost it out. There's always going to be little gremlins that appear here and there, and definitely plan for those to show up, of course.
I like that it's a universal experience, tech gremlins, and Justin shared some of their like warnings earlier, but it's almost comforting to see, you know what I mean, when you're in that moment, but you're also realizing, oh, everyone's dealing with this at the same time. That's great. Thank you, Team Scopely. Let's throw things over to Anvil. Gang, what was your experience like? What's your takeaways here?
Yeah. So basically, I would agree with Emily as well. Porting to URP is no small task, but it definitely is worth it. So you need to make a good planning for it. And basically, that's what I'm gonna explain as well. Just a mistake that we did with planning, which I think if we had to go into it again, of course, we wouldn't do. But for us, we come from a project where we have a live game, of course, and it's a very, very large project as well. So while planning the URP update, like we were discussing, and of course from a marketing perspective, like just improving the long-term maintainability of a game. It does not do much to marketing. So we decided to also couple a few features with it. And basically that was a big mistake for us because like not only we ended up having to test that the migration was performing and working well, but we also had to test all these extra gameplay features. So just a warning, like it's not a small task. So try to make it as small as possible if you have a live game, right? And second as well, like the SRP batcher is also, it's not like a magic bullet. So I would say make heavy use of the frame debugger. It's an excellent tool, and basically with it you can confirm that what you're expecting of it is actually working. And also as a side note, we also took this time while migrating to URP to really go in and simplify our shader setups in our game. But of course, while doing this, we really needed to test, and for example, we made sure that the RAM usage was actually improved in doing these processes, because we had some instances where our game ended up performing worse, but then when we fixed all of it, it was worth it in the end. So yeah, it's a take from us. I don't know if you have anything to add, Valentin, as well, but
I would just essentially clarify the fact about keeping the URP update small, because like for us specifically, we had the issue that we had client side and server side, and pushing an update that affects both sides is a lot more complex than pushing an update that's client side. And the URP update should essentially just remain client side, so we can transparently and continuously roll out like fixes, because you will end up missing something. You will end up missing a prop somewhere because it has been unpacked by somebody 5 years ago. So you better make it easy to be fixed.
Yeah, I the beast of a continuously updating game, I'm sure, presented you guys with a handful of challenges, and like you said, always realizing that there's something you've missed, I feel like, is also a common experience. Kluge, Justin, Esteban, what are your major kind of takeaways here, and what would you let people know if they were considering the move themselves?
Well, when you are like a small group of people or a small studio, probably you have a bunch of shaders that you acquire to the Unity Asset Store. So keep in mind that those are probably going to be pink madness. And we had to master the creation process of the shaders and translate those already shaders to HLSL or shader graph. But that was very beneficial in the long run because nowadays we craft every single shader and we are like more skillful in that part. So yeah, keep an eye on those shaders that are very that probably are very hard to replicate, like compute shaders and things like that.
Yeah, and I would say from the technical side, speaking of gremlins, probably like 80% of the big problems that you're having when you first switch over. You know, you finally pulled the trigger and you've done whatever preparations you can do ahead of time, and you know you run whatever automatic utilities you have, and you finally pull the trigger and do it, and you know everything is just like a bomb exploded or whatever. Like 80% of the problems that you have can be solved with like by checking the right box somewhere, and it's just like a matter of kind of identifying that. And with like this relatively new technology, there's not really maybe it's a little bit different now, but there's not as much information out there just from other people who've done it before. So you can't just like as reliably just go and like Google the problem you're having and expect to find like an immediate answer on the first result. So I would encourage you, if you are kind of like stuck with any specific problem, to actually kind of just go and learn about whatever it is that you're running into problems with, and just kind of actually understand whatever system is giving you trouble, like some just like a new, like a high level concept, so you actually know what you're looking at when you're kind of checking out this like sea of settings that is in all the like the new like assets and new configuration options, because there's going to be a lot of it, and it's going to take you a long time to find which box is the right box to check if you don't actually understand what you're looking at. So yeah, kind of expect to need to do that. Expect to kind of have to go out and learn some new things and kind of get a little bit more in depth in terms of like actually understanding what a lot of this stuff is doing under the hood, because the resources may not be available, where like somebody's just going to have some thread from like 5 years ago that just has the answer.
Yeah,
but yeah, long term that's great to do anyway, so I guess take the opportunity, take the excuse.
I think like you said, Justin, it's new. There's not always the problem solving resources, but hopefully from all of your experiences that you have all shared today, people have learned a couple of things. And I know that you've all kind of in your own ways been like, hey, heads up, make sure to not make this mistake I made. So I think it's very, very valuable that you all have shared. We do have some questions we want to pull in from our audience. Thank you again to everybody for being here. Thank you for asking these questions. And Adam, thank you for swinging this list over my way. So we'll just throw it out to the group. If you have anything that you'd like to add context-wise or sharing your own experience, feel free to just hop in a relatively mannerly order. I'm sure we'll get it together. First question that we want to bring in is, what are your top tips for people dealing with multiple platforms? I know that we have a few of you who have developed across multiple platforms. Any big tips for them?
Yeah, in terms of shaders, get used to use keywords for enable and disable things. You can use shader keywords for different graphics APIs, and that's how we manage showing different types of effects for example, Android, or as OpenGLSL or DirectX. So yeah, you can branch your shaders to try to fulfill the things that maybe the less powerful platforms doesn't have.
Thank you, Esteban. Anyone else have anything they'd like to add on this one? Your top tips, your secrets? I mean, if they're secrets, it makes sense that maybe you don't share them all, but all right, let's swing on to our next one here. What are the difficulties and challenges that were experienced? Like, for example, camera layer issues. I know you've shared some of your hardships, your problem-solving processes. Is there anything else that stands out that you can put out there as a, hey, I made this mistake so you don't have to?
I guess I can chime on in this one. For us, I think it was an issue specifically with the quality settings, because every like with URP, the quality settings can have every quality setting can have their own pipeline asset associated with it. And I remember vaguely that we had an issue with some shaders, not like if you have like render features disabled in some of them or missing in some of them, and you have like third-party assets, sometimes they don't tidy themselves up correctly when you go between the quality settings. So that's why, again, another good point for the memory profiler, make sure to like double check if you swap like your quality settings that you actually tidy up correctly behind you. Like that's one of the pitfalls we had.
That's great. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, I think it's awesome to just have this opportunity for knowledge share and see kind of almost a community approach to everyone sharing their knowledge, sharing their experience, and helping each other out. I think as a community manager, it makes me really happy. Emily,
I can chime into that one.
hop in.
Yeah, one of the things that we ran into was a few issues with like shader stripping and kind of how the different settings interacted, and the total size of shaders. So we do use asset bundles for a majority of our scenes and characters. And so we put our shaders that were used across multiple asset bundles into a single asset bundle. One thing that took me a while to figure out was that to get the shader variant collection to work, you need to have the shader and the shader variant collection in the same asset bundle. That that was a fun little thing. And then to help reduce some of the shader variants, I did change some of we based our custom shader off of the complex lit shader. And so I changed a few of the multi-compiles to shader features for things that we weren't using, or just things that we just wanted the specific variants in the shader variant collection to include, because the multi-compile will include everything. And then for some of the scene settings, there is a setting in the I believe it's the graphics menu in the project settings. So if you're using like the light map baking modes, we use baked light maps and shadow mask. So you do need to have those checked, or it will strip those variants even if you have them in the shader variant collections. So just make sure you're checking those. If you're using asset bundles, using the custom one is the way to go for that.
Awesome. Thank you. Our third question here we're pulling from our audience is question using VFX Graph for mobile VR platform. Is there a performance benefit to using VFX Graph over Shuriken particle system in URP? Apologies for my pronunciation. I've always struggled with that word. Does anyone want to share their experience as it applies to this question?
Well, in my experience, I want to use VFX Graph when I'm dealing with large amounts of particles. Otherwise, I just use Shuriken. There is some tweaks that you can apply to the VFX Graph in order to perform well. When you select the VFX Graph in the inspector, it's going to show you like these checkboxes that said like indirect draw, frustum cooling, things like that. You want to test every single one going to bottom to upwards, and see how it's going to be shown on your headset, and try to get as far as you can go with these ones, because every single one is going to give you different results, and they have like a tooltip that tells you in which cases are recommended. But yeah, it's a BFX Ref is obviously a very GPU intensive process, and it's designed for compute capable devices. The VR headsets are not yet there in the transition in terms of VFX graph. So it's only recommended in those cases. We use that because we have to have certain interactions between the VFX graph system and the rest of the game objects that wasn't possible to do with the Shuriken particle systems.
Awesome.
And I would just add that it's probably going to depend pretty heavily on whether you're CPU bound or GPU bound. Because if you're GPU bound and you're on something like the Quest, then you're going to have a hard time getting much benefits by switching over to the FX graph because you're just kind of putting more load onto the GPU. And yeah, on like a standalone VR headset, there's probably a pretty good chance that you are pushing the GPU more than the CPU. But yeah, it's going to depend on the circumstances.
Great. Thank you, guys. For someone transitioning to URP for the first time, what are the things you would definitely want to tell them? What are some rules of thumb that you think everyone should know? Is there one guiding principle that stands out to you all? I think you've all shared a little bit, but if you could just summarize it into one thing that stands out, what's one thing you think people should know?
Plan ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, really, honestly, just audit your game and see what needs to be converted and how far you need to take it. It's, again, very sneaky when you think you've done it all, but those gremlins, they're always around.
Wellington, I saw you unmute. You got something for the group?
Yeah, I'm gonna throw a curveball. Because kind of my job to kind of also like determine if stuff is worth it. And I'm telling you, if also evaluate if it is worth it to migrate to URP. Because if you're not going, like if you have like a single player game that you are only gonna maybe push a couple of updates to fix something on built-in pipeline, it doesn't have to go to URP. But if you if you're actually maintaining a game for the long term, then it is kind of a no-brainer.
Awesome.
Yeah. So just to add to that as well, just as a note, we're also a small studio, so we make heavy use of the asset store as well. So basically, I was one of the very first guys that was taking care of the URP migration. And the first task I really did was what were the old assets that are not really supported anymore, and what can we do really to support those now. And really, I even came up with costings, the time it would take, and everything. Obviously, this is all part of a planning process that you need to do when you can want to handle such a huge task, right? So, yeah, definitely, if you use a lot of assets, store stuff, make sure that you can replace them one way or another.
Great. Planning. Planning is key, is what I've taken away from this. They say measure twice, cut once. So maybe that applies here. For someone developing for standalone VR in URP, having to discuss with artists, animators, etc., about features that cannot be in, which are the most useful with the least resources, and the opposite, what has to be turned off for the devices to work correctly? Those of us with VR experience, anything to share?
Yeah, well, as we said before, shader graph, it's a huge friend of us. Some of the times when you write a shader, you have the problem that only renders in one eye, or it has some problems with the vision, things like that. Most of the shaders or all of them are compatible with VR. That's huge for us. And something that maybe you want to take away, well, obviously post-processing. post-processing, it's very taxing, and it's most of the time disabled by default. But yeah, I don't get anything
Minimize
else from that.
transparency. If you're talking to your artists and you know, they're not, like, if they're used to working on like a PC or something, where you don't have to worry about overdraw quite so much. Once you get onto standalone headsets, you're gonna feel all the overdraw. So yeah, you kind of need to plan to use a lot more opaque stuff where, you know, the natural inclination might be to have something transparent. So yeah, you know, you might need to get clever, but you know, the earlier you start working and thinking in that way, the easier it's going to be.
Yeah, you have some options there. You can try to fit the mesh as close as your transparent object as possible. You can also use alpha cutout if you need to just punch a hole here and there. And also you can use dithering in conjunction with the alpha cutout. So you can have like this zero transparency that with the latest headsets are not so much noticeable, and it can give you a boost in performance.
Thank you very much for sharing, you two. I appreciate it. We got a couple more here, and then we can kind of start to wind things down. What was the most difficult thing you had experienced while converting builds in project to URP? Apologies. Question's a little confusing. What was your biggest challenge that you overcame? Again, I appreciate you all sharing not just what worked, but what didn't work along your journey. Anything that stands out for anyone?
I can start, I guess, in this case again. The pink, overcoming the pink. That was the main issue. For like, we actually, like, I remember watching like Julian's editor and everything looked nice and dandy. And then when we actually started producing builds, we kind of suddenly started seeing like a lot of like missing shaders, etc., etc. So when you evaluate if it will actually work, make sure to also produce the build, not just trust the editor. I know it's what you see is what you get, but sometimes that fails spectacularly. Yeah, pretty much.
Awesome. Anyone else with a biggest hurdle to jump? You don't have to, by the way. Don't everyone feel like they have to rush in with the negativity. Like, it's great. No more problems.
I will say overcoming that pink, I'll reiterate, is really tough at first when you, especially as an artist, looking at the start of this whole thing and all you see is a wall of pink or a pink neon screen. It is overwhelming at first, and then looking at everything you have to convert over time, it's not going to happen all at once. Or if you have an awesome batcher, it might, and we did, but it's still a lot of content that we have to go through. So if you can just get that over that initial hump, and it will get better. Just you just have to have consistency with converting.
Yeah, I saw when Wellington was responding that it struck a chord with you, Chris. I could tell. So thank you for jumping in to add on top of that. Okay, we've got time for one more question that we want to pull in here. Does upgrading to URP cause any issue to the engineering side of the game? Does anyone have any direct experience with this possible predicament? Anyone see any issues on their engineering? And go, you're in.
I can start again. Like, it's kind of my thing. So for us, it was mostly quality setting issues. Like that's something that a programmer has to take care of essentially on engineering, like a person of engineering. That's why I must also, like was saying earlier, make sure that the update is not including anything except URP stuff. So you're essentially make sure you can fix the things that need to be fixed as quickly as possible, because there will be some things you will be overlooking. But other than that, it was reasonably artist heavy, essentially, not engineering heavy.
Great insight. I appreciate it. Okay. If no one has any, oh, Emily, go.
Okay. Yeah, I can add in a little bit.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I think just kind of like testing a wide variety of devices is really important. And then yeah, other engineering was just kind of yeah, doing a lot of profiling, making sure we were maintaining performance, things like that. And then yeah, eventually we're going to be transitioning the team to a new pipeline. So documentation is always good if you're doing a really massive transition. For us, you know, a lot of the assets were very different, kind of reorganize some things. So documentation is always good.
Great. Esteban.
I guess that some devs can relate that the layers get like we don't have infinite layers. So from the engineering side, they want to use that for the scripting, and we as an artist, we want that for the lighting. So have the ability to use lighting layers instead of OG layers. It's really powerful, and we don't want to compete with layers and mess the things in the gameplay side.
Great. Thank you guys so much. Again, a big shout out to everybody for being here today. Thank you for asking your questions. Thank you for being engaging. If you joined us partway through, this webinar is recorded and will be distributed to everybody who attended, as well as anyone who registered and was unable to attend. So keep an eye out for that. I want to extend a massive thank you to all of our panelists today. Wallington, Julian, Chris, Emily, Justin, Esteban. Thank you all for being here, for sharing your experiences, sharing your expertise, and sharing your passion. I think myself as a community manager, being able to have a moment to discuss things that people are truly passionate about is one of my favorite things. So we're already seeing some reactions in chat, but if our panelists could get a little bit of extra love, I would appreciate that. Thank you all so much for sharing and being here with us. I had a blast. For all of you attending this panelist experience, I'm going to show you guys your next opportunity to join us will be on September 10th. We will have another webinar optimizing game performance with culling techniques. If you would like to join us, please scan that QR code at your leisure whenever you have a moment. We would love to see you all again at our future one. Again, a big thank you to all of our panelists, but also to everyone working behind the scenes to make this happen. Adam and Nancy, Madison and Fergus, thank you all for bringing me into the fold. I had an absolute blast. I hope that you watching learn something new, are continuing to feel inspired and passionate about what you do, because I know this was inspiring to me, and I'm not even a game dev, but I think I'm going to change my career because you all convinced me. Thank you. Again, everybody, my name is Jackson. I run our Twitch and YouTube live streams. If you want to check those out, twitch.tv/Unity or youtube.com/Unity. We're on there weekly. We're trying to bring new and exciting content, a lot of learning opportunities, a lot of inspiring conversations like hopefully you had today. I'm going to wrap things up here and say, again, just a massive thank you across the board to everybody here today. Thank you again so much. My name's Jackson, and we're going to wrap things up there. Have a great rest of your week, everybody.